had been a golden afternoon, and I remember having the familiar conviction that life was beginning over again with the summer and summer.
When you first brought up the whole diary thing, like, I understood it on multiple levels, but it took like a combination of concepts together with the diary thing to really bring it home to at like a deeper emotional level. Like, I'm going to now take what my understanding of this is and actually I'm going to work, my work is going to be different now because
different
of this.
Approach.
And not even like, yeah, I mean, there's a different approach. And so, you know, I think in the context of art, it seems kind of corny or sort of a little dissonant to talk about the YouTube video I just released today, but I had written a draft of this, and most of the drafts of my YouTube videos that are commentary are, you know, I have a thesis in mind. I'm making a point. I'm showing, you know, these are my arguments that reinforce my point. It's not quite as boring and as a language arts class 5-paragraph essay because I write it in my voice and all that stuff. And I sat on it for a while and I started rereading it. And I'm like, good. And I made some changes, adjustments. And then I listened, you know, all this Rick Rubin stuff and this clip in particular. And I did another pass, and it wasn't like, I'm going to do another pass where this is my diary entry. It was like, I don't know, just a perspective shift. And it wasn't a choice to write it differently. It just was obvious to. There was not a choice. It wasn't possible to do it any other way. And I did a pass where I rewrote it, where I'm like, I'm not going to write it thinking about how people are going to react to the points I'm making. I'm just going to write what I believe. Like, this is what I think about this subject, and I'm going to just say what I feel. And I did, and when I edited it, you know, I didn't make any big changes. And again, this isn't photography, this isn't painting, this is a YouTube video about video editing software. But I still think, you know, part of what I enjoy about making that content is there is obviously a strong component of creativity or, I don't know, academic thought. I don't know what it is. Yeah. But a point of view, a perspective. Like, I have something to say about this, you know.
I wonder too if it's like, it's a form that's not very, I don't mean this in like a derogatory way, but it's not very complex in terms of like.
That's probably part of why I like it.
No. But you just talked about it in terms of like a language arts essay. Like, yeah. And I've always had the thought of like, you know, just take that simple 5-paragraph essay and write 5,000 of those. Yeah. And just stay true to that. Don't be like, oh, I'm gonna go and do the perspective shifts or like the draft number 4 or whatever.
Get fancy.
I just take the. And see how that evolves. Yeah. You know, it's like the Zen, like do the same thing over and over.
Jiro dreams of sushi. Exactly. You get to make rice for 10 years and then you can touch the fish.
And, you know, it is a very simple, you have an argument, you're going to make it, you pretty much.
Oh, big chunk of ice.
Big chunk of ice just fell. You pretty much know how to make the argument, how it's going to be structured. Yeah. And that frees you up to kind of have a full creative experience. You're not trying to figure out
No, because I've been collecting these ideas. That's what I love about it, is because I collect these little thoughts like, oh, I wonder if Apple's doing this with Final Cut because of this. And it may seem kind of trivial to the listener, but this is something I really care about. And I think about, like, I wonder if that, and I connect these disparate elements, and you know, the bad example is that meme from Always Sunny in Philadelphia where Charlie's like pointing at the board with everything all interconnected. But I come up with, you know, those little things I collect then coalesce into, I have something to say about this. I have a point of view that I want to offer. You know, it's like standing around after a movie and everybody's talking about the movie and you're just kind of like, yeah, and then a couple things happen, and you're like, "Oh yeah,"
and wait a minute,
and you're like, "Wait a minute, this," and it's just a moment like that. It's very simple, and I really enjoy using my channel to communicate those ideas or predictions or whatever you want to call it, versus what I think some channels do, and I certainly haven't done it, but I'm at risk for it. Is going, I think this idea about what's going on with this piece of software or this piece of technology is it'd be like us talking about the R1, right? Yeah. Like deliberately saying, we're going to talk about this AI device that kind of that kind of had some shockwaves through the tech community because we know people want to hear about it, even though we haven't had time to really think about what we have to say, or we haven't had a moment where like, oh, this is my hopefully unique point of view on this piece of tech and what the ramifications are or what the limitations are or whatever. And, you know, just like we were talking about it in the pre-show, you know, we're sort of working through it together, but, you know, we both came in having watched it with ideas about what it means, how it might connect with our sensibilities. And you said some stuff like, oh, I hadn't thought about that. Maybe I said something where you're like, oh yeah, I hadn't thought about that either. And, you know, in this video, just to wrap up the point, this video is sort of the culmination of all that thinking about it. Yeah. And then going, this is what I have to say. Here it is. Done. Move on to the next thing. And I'm already, you know, outlining what a next commentary video is based on these little ideas I've collected, and they're coalescing into, okay, here's my thesis, and I'm going to go do it.
Well, I'm interested in exploring the form thing a little bit, but while you were making the point of like all these different ideas, I think it's interesting because a lot of the time viewers come at things from that maybe initial perspective where it's like, you're like, we're going to talk about this thing, idea, whatever, and why it's good or bad. Right. And it's like this very like lazy binary, you know, simplistic approach to everything. It's the reason is because you can get speed to market. There's a lot of benefits, you know, commercially to that. But I think it'd almost be a better experience for a lot of people. Like you have a lot less people that get frustrated or like angry when they listen to things if they just approach it as like, oh, let's just go in and just play with these ideas too. Yes. You know, if they came at it from more of a perspective of play rather than like a confirmation or, you know, just, oh, I'm going to come in and like, oh, that's interesting. Or, I've thought about that before. You know, or
I'm looking for a rigid outcome. Like, I want to come away from this black and white, ones and zeros. And like
it's kind of like everybody tries to make sense of chaos, right? You can put a bunch of objects on a table, and the first thing a human's going to do when they sit down is try to put them together in some structure that makes sense to their vision of the world, to their metaphor of how they see things. And I think it might be a better, you know, it might be a better experience to normalize that idea of just like, oh, let's just play with. Yeah. You know, well, how does this feel? What does this make me feel like? Oh.
Yeah. And kind of going back to the diary example, which that's really grown on me especially after watching that clip from Rick Rubin, link in the show notes.
He probably presented it a lot better than I did as well.
Well, I don't see it, but I think, I don't know. I just feel like it was the dominoes falling, and that was the last domino to fall for that concept.
It's an idea that you have to sit with for a little bit too, in a way of just not intellectually, but just, you know, it's like we talked about the poetry thing maybe last week, where it's like you hear a piece of poetry, you're probably not going to understand most of it at first. Right. But if you hear it early enough, you have the rest of your life to understand it, and you'll understand it more and more. Mm-hmm. It's probably falls into that category a little bit more.
Well, in like a diary, right? A diary being something that I write, usually you're intended to be the only person who's going to read it, and that's why you don't lie, right? So apply that concept to the work that you make, right? I'm also trying to apply a similar concept because I've been thinking about this as well. Like, what is my channel and like what I'm doing there? And the closest thing I can think of is if my photography is my diary and my channel is not the work, but it's something else. What I think it is I think it's honestly, it's like a book club. Yeah. A place where like-minded people who share common interest, reading books, Final Cut Pro, photography, can have a conversation about this thing that they care about. And it's not finished work, but it's honest, open dialogue about what they think is going on in the story, in the movie, in the book, in the photo. I was watching a photography video last night from, I think it's The Photographic Eye, and he was talking about William Eggleston's photo of the tricycle. And sort of, it's like some people are like, oh, I don't get it, man. Like, what is, this is art? Okay. And other people are like, oh my God, the reaction that they have. And the nature of the video is, we're just in a community, and yeah, we're not sitting across from each other like you and I are, but we're just having a conversation. He puts out his thoughts on something, we respond in the comments. Same thing with my channel. Hey guys, this is what I thought of about Final Cut Pro. Here's my thesis. Here's how I'm defending it. I want to know what you think. Yeah. Tell me how I'm wrong in a constructive, nice, sharing, friendly way, and bring your ideas. So just like you did with the diary idea, I'm like, oh yeah, I never thought about that.
It's just like open public discourse.
Yeah, public discourse. But there's there's not a wall to the community, but but there is sort of, it's encapsulated a little bit.
Well, I mean, you
and that's what I like about
the
your
wall
channel
thing is
too.
interesting too, because we talked about the Mark Andreessen, Rick Rubin. He talked about
tetragrammaton.
What was the was it Usenet? What was it?
Oh gosh.
It's like it was basically, it's a forum board.
In
the 90s. This predates my internet time.
Yeah.
And but
probably a little bit of mine. I was I was like 95, 96 when I first got on.
And this was but basically he said when network effect, like the natural effect of the network effect is that it dumbs down the community over time, because like the old joke is, I would never be a part of a club that would accept me as a member.
Right.
He's like, but that becomes true, because every time a new set of members comes in, the set of, I guess, there's a reason there's admission limits and things like this. And, that's not to be, some people utilize that as an elite thing and like, oh, we're better. But it's like,
gatekeeping.
For a lot of things, it makes sense to have the structure that way. And I think
it's almost a form of quality control, right?
Quality control. Yeah. Just, hey, this is, there's a set of expectations.
Yeah.
You have to understand this, at least this much, to get the point of entry.
Like a prerequisite for a college course.
Yeah.
And prereqs.
Well, so I was talking about it's like a public discourse. I think public discourse would probably be, the unfortunate thing is that you see this in a lot of little clubs or whatever. Yeah. Like groups of people online where nobody can just come and, there's a way to, I guess what I'm trying to say, there's a way to handle somebody who's, you don't have to be aggressive when somebody's like not at the same level of understanding, because I am not at the same level of understanding as most people in the world at most things in the world.
Yeah.
And, there's a couple of things though that, I'm at a higher level of understanding, but that's completely just up to the person and the experience.
Yeah.
And so it's like, I could just as easily talk to somebody and sound like a complete idiot talking about some of the things that I think I know stuff about. So like, just imagine, you know what I'm saying? There's a way to deal with that though. And I think we'd probably be better off if every public interaction was approached from the sense of be respectful.
Yeah.
But then like you created everybody's got to be right, and if somebody's trying to come in with something different, it's like, no, you're wrong, this is about this, or this is about, you see this in movies and literature and photography all the time, where it's like, it's not about that, it's about this.
Oh gosh.
It's like, I'm pretty sure it's not about any of those things, it's probably about all of those things.
Yeah.
But it's just this, it turns into this intellectual pissing contest undeservedly, where you have people that think they're elite because they happen to understand one thing that somebody else doesn't, and they use that and they hold that high because there's some kind of personality deficit that they're trying to fill.
Well, I think it goes back to your documentary Century of the Self, like all that programming or whatever it is that makes us want to individualize so intensely that, first of all, we have to come up with it first. We have to have like the offbeat, unique perspective that nobody had thought of, but then all of our quote unquote followers go, oh yeah, I see that. Yeah. Oh, you're smart. We want to be led by you.
Oh yeah.
And that's, to me, and then what does that all come back to? It comes back to ego. And we've talked about this numerous times. We've talked about surrender. We've talked about ego. I think as this podcast progresses, we're gonna when we talk about these ideas, we're going to be able to, whether we recognize in the moment to do so or not, we're going to trace it back to sort of the root, the root cause or the root thing that's there.
Root. I'm just kidding.
Root. Us.
That Midwest mentality.
And I think, and again, part of this podcast too, for me is, and had these conversations with you, which have happened, predate the podcast, conversations with anybody that I, have a connection and a ease with and all that stuff, is to understand that, to map it, to identify it myself, to recognize I'm not going to eliminate these forces.
Yeah.
I'm not going to always make my work a diary entry, but the more cognizant I am of these things, the more open, the more listening, the more surrender, the more all of that, the better the work will be. I mean, just how I'm approaching the work I'm doing on my channel, the photography work on my channel, that's sort of like a little bit of a hybrid between the work and the public discourse book club kind of thing, and like the stuff that I'm just collecting and I don't know what I'm going to do with it, but I took these photos for a reason, for a diary entry reason. I lost my train of thought, but the place that I've come from before that
should be the name of the podcast. Is I lost my train of thought.
I'm glad I got it back. Where I've come from doing some of those things on a very instinctive, impulsive level, but not understanding it. I don't know if that's a bad thing to like understand. I have myself mapped. I know why I did this. I know Rick Rubin told me it was a diary entry. Alex and I talked about it being surrender, blah, blah, blah. Like, I don't need to have it all figured out, but there's something for me personally where when I can kind of know the glossary of terms and have a little bit of a fuzzy map about what's going on, I'm less confused about what I'm doing.
Yeah. It's almost like
it helps shore up intention and purpose and focus. And this goes into something
it's interesting because it is almost like embracing a chaotic state a little bit, like a less clear picture, or a less, we're always like, it gets back to the things on the table, right? We're always chasing. We have to understand we can't just sit with things.
Yeah.
We can't just sit with things like, here's a bunch of things that I don't really have a full grasp on.
Yeah.
And we can't just be like, these are cool. Like, let me just put these in my little lunch pail and carry them around for a little bit.
Right.
We have to have an opinion. We have to have something that we have to grab into it. We have to, here are these ideas. They have to be put into a structure.
Right.
And I think unstructured thinking, I think we'd benefit from that as a whole in public discourse, just being able to, why do you think that? Why did that idea come? Or even in collaboration, I heard this thing the other day that was, you just, you hear something, you're like, that is a terrible idea. And then you end up trying that idea.
Yeah.
It's like more likely than not, that's the one where you're like, oh man, that was perfect.
Yeah. Because it's different when you do it.
Yeah. And
versus when you think of it.
Being able to step back and just be like, okay, let's try it.
Yeah.
There's not that level of patience in the current public discourse. And I think creating a space to where that is, that's always been what I would love to see.
Yeah.
I talked about it with AI. Like, you can have a conversation with AI and there's no fear that you're going to sound silly.
You're not vulnerable.
You're not, you're removing that vulnerability.
Right.
Because it's like, I'm just talking to
because it's not going to roll its eyes. It's not going to make fun of me. Or
when you're talking with your partner.
And maybe eventually it does.
Yeah. But, or when you're talking with a close friend, when you're talking with a partner, it removes that layer.
Yeah.
But when you're with somebody who you don't know, all your guardrails are up.
Right.
And you're afraid to have most people are afraid to have any kind of meaningful anything, because that's where it gets into.
Afraid.
It's like, are they going to agree with this? Maybe they have a different worldview. Maybe they're going to, maybe they don't. And that's the same thing as, putting those barriers up in a conversation is the same thing as putting those barriers up on a piece of art.
Yeah.
When you're going into a conversation with a stranger and you're like, I'm not going to talk about, this about social whatever, this about anything political, or I'm not going to talk about my religious beliefs, or I'm not going to talk about, because you're like, oh, it might offend that person, or it might, and it's like, is that, so you're censoring that about yourself.
Your diary.
You're censoring the diary, and it's like
the diary element of book club.
A lot of people approach, right. A book club is probably better if you're just like, what'd you guys think of this?
Right.
And it's like,
and there's
no silly questions. Like
there's a subtext. When I say book club, there's a subtext of like, you're in a place where it's safe to make a mistake, or to not understand something, or to understand something and teach us or have us look at it differently. It goes both ways. And that's kind of what I mean by
it's a safe
book club. I don't know.
It's a safe space to just like explore ideas.
Right.
Like, hey, that's what university was supposed to be, right? For a lot of, but then it turns into this thing where it's like, well, you have a bunch of professors who are trying to put their ego on this student body,
and they have bullshit that they're dealing with.
So and like they have
insecurities, failures. I'll give you an example, just a quick story. When I was in grad school at Florida State, I was in playwriting because it was half playwriting, half screenwriting. I'm in playwriting class, and we had to read something together. I don't know what it was, but is he a philosopher? I don't even remember. Camus, right? Is he
Camus. Yeah. The French philosopher.
So I had no knowledge of this person whatsoever. I'm a graduate student, 27 years old. Never read the word before in my life. Never knew the person. Never heard it on Jeopardy, and I watched a lot of Jeopardy. And I said Camus because it's Camus.
Yeah.
And the professor looks at me, and this is my interpretation of how he responded, not necessarily the truth of what he was feeling, but my interpretation of it was, the line reading is, it's Camus. And it was this like condescending, like, you idiot,
this moron. Yeah.
Right. How do you not know that kind of feeling? Now, that could be me projecting that from insecurity in the moment. Like, because I certainly have come through with a lot of confidence and chip on my shoulder, being good at Jeopardy, that I know a lot about nothing.
Yeah.
But it was just one of those moments where
pop culture Rolodex,
where I thought I was in book club.
Yeah.
And that trust that I was in book club was violated by someone in a position of authority that I thought was, of all the people in that room, the one I could count on to be gentle with me if I made a mistake.
And so then you're completely self-conscious moving forward. I'm sure it was just a shit show.
I think about it randomly all the time, but it's not like, you're so stupid, man. How did you not know that? I think of the violation, the betrayal, a micro trauma, if you will.
See, but that your lack of context on how his name was pronounced had nothing to do with your interpretation of the content or like what you could have offered in terms of free flowing thought or new bringing your own interpersonal context to that situation.
Yeah.
It had nothing to do with, and he violated it and threw out the window any kind of true exploration of what could have happened.
And I think
by that one. Yeah. You see people doing that all the time in YouTube comments or.
I think it happens a lot with people that, and we don't have to unpack this now, but I think this happens a lot with people, I think, that have a really high emotional intelligence, but they're not always the smartest person with like academics or academia or trivia or, like knowing the pronunciation of this or that, but they're highly perceptive. And I do consider myself someone who like is good at trivia. Like I know a lot of stuff that just gets stored up there, but I'm not always the smartest about something that's logical or ethical. I don't mean like I have bad ethics, but I mean like these sort of situational things that you have to deal with. I'm not articulating this very well, and this is kind of symbolic of what I'm talking about. Like I don't know how to articulate this, but like I can read the room, the emotional intelligence, and I think, and my dissonance with the professor was we were opposites.
Yeah.
He was incredibly intelligent, very smart, but I don't think he had very, I didn't sense a lot of emotional intelligence. And I think I'm the opposite, to the point where sometimes I think people think I'm kind of ditzy sometimes in how I present ideas or talk about things. but I think the emotional intelligence is where the strength is. And that's just something that I've, sort of tried to map about myself over time and go, it's okay.
I think
it's all right to sometimes say Camus because you have no idea. Like, don't beat yourself up. Just, and again, just to wrap up, my pain in that isn't that I was dumb and didn't know how to pronounce it.
Yeah.
How did I not know that? It was, there's an understanding in this room that there's a trust here that we can make mistakes and express ideas that are not sure on, and will be handled properly.
Yeah.
And
I think first of all, like, that is kind of on the professor's shoulders of, like, that's, in my opinion, that's his responsibility to maintain. You hear it all, like, good work needs a safe space to be created.
Yeah.
Like, you don't want people reading your work.
Yep.
And, like, first draft, most vulnerable state. You don't want people reading that are going to be like, you're such a fucking idiot. Or,
and I think, like,
your topo too.
Yeah, I know.
I was just giving you a little.
I take it with me. But I think too with him, this was a backtrack for him in his career.
Yeah.
I think it was something that he was qualified to do because of his degrees, that he had to do maybe because of the money, and ultimately his dreams of playwriting and screenwriting and all that stuff were not being realized as soon as I think maybe he thought they should be. Again, this is just my interpretation. And so I think he was in a place of debt or negativity or whatever it was. So any little trigger would trigger that, like, I'm sitting here in Tallahassee, Florida, talking to this dumbass kid who doesn't even know who Camus is.
Yeah.
What the fuck am I doing?
Yeah. Well, I think it's like, there's so much in the world to know things about. Just being, like, completely honest. You know what I'm saying?
Like, a wealth of information.
Like, there is.
I mean, I didn't start drinking coffee till I was like 36, 37
more
years
stuff
old.
than ever, than there's ever been.
Yeah.
So, like, the odds that anybody knows anything about any thing that you're speaking about, the odds are already astronomical. And they're getting worse every day.
And I look at that moment, though, and I go, I'm glad it happened because I know now, hopefully with my emotional
how to say
intelligence,
no, I'm just kidding.
when I'm in book club, and when I am, and people are expressing their feelings or whatever, their interpretation, whatever, to treat them with respect, even if I don't disagree or I don't think it's a very intelligent perspective or whatever.
Yeah.
I'm not going to pass judgment. I'm not going to betray their trust. None of that stuff. They'll be handled properly.
Well, there was a great quote. So I watched a movie last night called In the Soup. And I told you about it a little bit.
Link in the show notes.
And highly recommend, actually. I mean, it's not the greatest thing of all time, no, but it's just
looks
like
a little DV-ish to me. Like,
not it's
hard because of the trailer.
It's well done. I mean, it's a good. It's not.
I just meant like the camera. Like, was the camera? Like,
I'm pretty sure it's just film. Yeah, probably 35, super 35.
And it was probably just because of the whatever digitization they did or whatever.
Yeah, I mean,
transferred it to tape.
I'm sure the YouTube compression that I showed it to you on. But anyways,
this is not important.
There was a scene in there where it's this pretentious kid, and he's like 25, whatever, and he's talking to this old guy. He's like, gangster, grew up in Jersey, and he's name dropping all these names, and he's like, oh, and then the old guy's like, you essentially, like, you don't, like, that doesn't impress anybody.
Yeah,
like you're you don't understand life, and it's incredibly obvious, and you're trying to compensate with this, I want it to be like a Tarkovsky or like a and a Renoir, or like, it's like nobody gives a shit, like nobody. And I think that's something that I've always tried to plug into anything I create, anything I do, is just like if you're trying to create some high-minded piece of work, pretentious, you're betraying the,
Sorry, I thought about that my bougie French title for my short film from we talked about in a previous episode. Grâce de pitié. Give me a break. This is what an artist
was. This before the Camus? No, I'm just kidding. No, but like, you're not, and I've always had such a high regard for people you know the types too. I mean,
Yeah.
he's the Jersey guy who's like the Jersey gangster. He comes in and he just doesn't, you know. Some of that is false confidence, but there's also some people who can just show up and be like, I don't know anything, and I do know a little bit about some things.
Yeah.
And I'm just excited to learn about this. If you want to tell me about it, I'm super here to listen, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like when you approach it from that standpoint too, it's less because you can approach it from the point of just, I'm so fucking dumb, I don't know anything.
Right. Yeah. Beat yourself
And you're just
up.
going to be miserable all the time.
Yeah. No.
And then from the audience perspective, if, you know, you're often there, you see a lot of people where they try to project and try to create this heady whatever because it makes them feel like they're in a sect above or whatever. And you know, I think the best work is just true, honest work. And a lot of times the high-minded stuff is more culturally referential. Like you're referencing something here, something there. And all that stuff's going to die out anyways. Like the most primitive things are the things that are going to last the longest.
Well, I think a lot of that stuff has to get by, you know, if we go back to the diary entry thing and, you know, I think sometimes, you know, great work, you know, there's certainly great work out there where like at least my first thought is like the technical execution, the technical mastery, like you just, you know, a photorealistic painting from the 1700s. And I'm like, the first level is how in the world did someone do that?
Yeah.
You know, some of, you know, Michelangelo's carvings, like this was a solid hunk of marble and now it is this unbelievable sculpture.
Yeah.
How did, you know, the proportions, the legs, like just like understanding that.
Bigger than a building. Yeah.
Yeah. Like all that stuff. And then of course, you know, too, like the diary entry where you see a piece of art that maybe it doesn't seem terribly complicated and like the artisanship and craft that went into making it, but there's something about it that just punches you in the gut or hits you in the heart because there's something about it that just exudes this, like it was this person's diary entry and you're experiencing it and it's communicating raw emotion or whatever. It's obviously pulling something out of you and your experience. You know, those pieces of work, I don't know. Sometimes they only resonate with a few people and sometimes they resonate with millions.
Yeah.
And I imagine too, there's things out there that I have seen that I probably have been dismissive of because it didn't feel like a diary entry to me when I consumed it, or it didn't bring something out of me or give me an experience. And I might be so egotistical or callous or flippant to be like, that's not art. Not saying that I do that now.
I guess you can only test the diary entry principle. You can only test it against yourself.
Yeah,
like
subjective versus objective.
Like eventually you're going to get to a point. I think the best test, in my opinion, the best test of the diary entry method.
Yeah.
I can go back and read diary entries from when I was 14.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to judge it one way or another unless I'm like, because it was diary entry.
Yeah.
I'm just going to be like, well, that was pretty accurate of that day in my life when I was 14.
Right.
Now, if I was being, inauthentic in that diary entry or trying to, then I'll go back and read it.
And you were writing it.
I'll just go back and, oh, that's disgusting. I hate that.
Yeah.
So, if you create a piece of work and you can go back and experience that piece of work again, a couple of years later, usually it just takes a couple of years.
Right.
You'll cringe or you won't cringe. And I think that's a good metric to how, at least in my experience, some people might just be able to watch stuff and be like, oh no, that's fine.
Yeah.
But it's usually a good metric to, one, if you've grown or evolved, and two, if it was honest at the time or not.
Right.
Based on how you react. There was another, so I kind of like, before we get too far away, how do you think, like, I want to talk about creating safe spaces.
Yeah.
Creating safe spaces for work. And safe spaces is kind of like
you sent me the Bradley Cooper interview with Spike Jonze, the Directors on Directors, and he talks about the set and the sanctuary of the set, and creating that as a safe space, no visitors, all that stuff. That's the first thing I thought.
Yeah,
when
no.
That.
That's a good. I mean, I haven't. It's been a couple of months. I haven't thought about that.
I went back.
But no,
and queued everything up.
That's a good. That's a good pull because basically they talk about the most important thing
Did I say?
And it's so easy to violate.
I might have said Spike Jonze. It's Spike Lee.
Spike Lee and Bradley Cooper. Yeah. We were talking about her beforehand, though.
Yep.
It's so important, and you hear all the great directors talk about this. And I mean, if you've worked on a set and you have a bit of understanding of what that environment's like, then I think you probably know this too. But I've worked on both kinds of sets, and typically when I'm leading a set, I like it to be, if you don't need to be here for this thing, look, being in acting it's highly difficult enough.
Yeah.
And like the idea that you're going to be able to overcome this insecurity, or you're going to be able to really open yourself up to a world, that's incredibly difficult in and of itself. So add in 13 people that are watching, it's just going to make things more difficult. And there is a group of people, I've worked with them, you've worked with them, and it's like a archetype of a person where they're more concerned with how many, like, let's get a jib and like let's get 46 people and they're going to stand around and everybody's going to be standing around, and because they're more interested in the pageantry of what's going on, rather than just like, look, it is your job to create a safe space. It's like, I'm glad that you have all this pageantry, but the result, nobody's going back. Nobody looks at anything. All the shittiest films ever with big budgets, I'm sure it looked impeccable on that set. I'm sure that it was as impressive as you could imagine. Like, do we go back and judge it though? On like, man, the film sucked. No emotional connection whatsoever. Didn't understand what they were doing. Just terrible. But did you see the set?
Right.
Like, that thing was killer. Nobody gives a shit.
No.
Like, there's plenty of stuff that was shot. I mean, Kubrick talks about, he'd often, I think it was on Eyes Wide Shut, where it'd be like him and a DP, and like you'd have Nicole Kidman and Tom Cruise at the time too, just as big as a name as, if not bigger, because everything was kind of more. It was more of like a media powder keg back then. There were only so many outlets. And they would just go to places and shoot. It'd be like the DP, Kubrick, I'm sure like a production assistant probably, or like maybe a grip.
Steal a few shots.
A grip who can kind of double as like a gaffer or something. And they would steal shots for like important scenes.
Yeah.
And you hear about that all the time, just throughout you listening to great directors. So all of that to say, creating a safe space, it's important. How do you think, like, how do you go about that? And that was a film example, but I think this applies to everything. Do you feel like this is a safe space? Does the camera influence?
Well, if Maggie wasn't here, that damn dog just puts me on edge.
She puts me on edge.
She's listening to every word and judging me.
Got to really work into what we're saying.
By the way?
Honestly, she's usually in here.
Oh wait, she couldn't care less.
I mean, did the camera stress you out, or like? Because there are certain things.
No, I'm so used to it now.
Yeah, I was gonna say
it's such a standard part of my life for so many years. Whether I was doing it on my own as a kid with a VHS camera, all the way up till 2018 when I started my YouTube channel. It admittedly, a lot of what I've made has not been terribly collaborative to where I have to be thinking about creating a safe space in making work with other artists. Now, I've done commercial work where I'm very cognizant of everyone being respectful. Obviously myself, as somebody who struggles with control and the pressure of getting, the day and all that stuff, I certainly have behaviors where if that stuff mounts in certain situations, I can become visibly impatient or frustrated or whatever. And I go, fortunately can map myself to go, let's make sure you're not contributing to any unsafe feelings that anybody has. And I think, that hasn't been an issue for me on commercial shoots and all that.
And you said unsafe feelings there. So I just want to take a moment to kind of define what we're talking about with safe spaces. Cause it's like, I think it's like a place where you can be vulnerable,
right,
and not have to worry about getting killed for it.
right.
Like that's essentially it, right?
Raked over the coals, laughed at, ridiculed, funny looks, made to feel like you don't, that your contribution isn't needed.
Yeah.
I make that joke sometimes. There's been a few times, and I don't think, sometimes I think when I've been in situations in professional settings where I don't like that everyone thinks like, oh, he's like the guy that helps the editor, or whatever position it was. My ego and my insecurities will come out and be like, well, I kind of want everyone to know, like, I kind of know this world. Like,
and so you start dropping comments and you start
doing that crap. And
you look back on it, it just feels gross.
Yeah. And then people are like, why's the whatever guy talking about this stuff? Like your insecurities about them. No, really, like I'm a talented filmmaker. I just have to do this for money. That's why I'm like PAing on this thing. But like, I lived in LA. I know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Like just stupid stuff.
And if you
like
could
that.
see a recording of yourself doing that, you'd just be like,
just like, get over yourself.
And I think that you just perfectly exemplified why it's necessary, because you're in a space that it doesn't seem like it's just, you can be yourself, you can be whatever. Right. There is an expectation. And, sometimes that's the director comes in and starts talking about this or about that. And they're just like, look at how good and that happens, or the DP or whatever. Yeah. And suddenly you have people that feel like it's a keeping up with the Joneses environment. So then you start wearing a mask. Yeah. You start changing your interactions with people. You start presenting the best version, or the plastic version of yourself to whatever that world is. And obviously, if that's happening to the crew, it's affecting how they're going about their work. Suddenly they're like, well, I don't want to try that thing because I don't know if I can pull it off. So why put myself in that vulnerable situation? If that's happening with the crew, it's happening with the people that are literally carrying the thing. So,
well, and if, especially
singers,
talking about a film setting, when I would be in a situation where I've got a little bit of my own agenda, well, I'm going to make inroads with this person, or I'm going to drop a hint that I'm a screenwriter, or, whatever, to like try to like satisfy my agenda. Well, even if you're the quote unquote lowest person on set, the smallest position, like you're the assistant to the caterer or whatever it is, all those positions. And this, to me, creating a safe space as a director or producer or someone who's at a top level position, to try to communicate to everyone, just as a reminder, because sometimes we need that. What we're doing is all in service to the work we're creating. And even though Bill here is the director and I'm the producer and she's the lead actress, we're all working together to serve the vision of this work. Yeah. And that goes all the way down to the guy in the truck with all the gear, to the PA, to whatever. You all have an opportunity to make this happen, because without all of you, it doesn't happen. You're here for a reason. And I think for me, and this is the beauty, especially of film school and being in these positions where I had like kind of my own little agenda, and maybe I wasn't paying attention to what was going on, and I got busted for being loud, or they had to shut the door because I was talking, or whatever it was. You almost need that conversation to get everybody to coalesce behind this thing.
Start with that almost, yeah.
Because some people that don't really understand, they might think, well, I'm not as important to this as the lead actress. Like, well, actually you are. Yeah. And even if you aren't focused on it, it's going to be a problem. And Bradley talked about that in the discussion with Spike Lee. He said, on my set, I expect everyone, and I mean everyone, to bring it, to be focused, to be contributing, all that stuff.
I like Bradley Cooper's.
And he said no chairs too. Like, I don't like chairs.
That's
Video Village.
That's what I was getting into, is he doesn't have Video Village, which, if you're not familiar, that's basically, you shoot a take, there's usually this section that's like built out, and you go watch the take.
You can watch playback.
It's this huge thing dumped in the middle, and people set it up, and there's always, sometimes you have directors who just sit over there the whole time, and you can look, it works sometimes. Yeah, sometimes everyone has their process. That's how you do it. But I like that a lot, because it's kind of what And I don't know if Bradley Cooper's made a great film yet, but his mind is that of someone that I think has many great films in him.
Yeah, potential.
And I'm interested to see kind of.
Did you see Maestro yet?
I watched like half of it.
Yeah. I haven't seen it yet.
It seems, in my opinion, it's like it's almost feels kind of like that, like some of those early like PTA films.
Yeah.
Where it's like
trying some things.
Yeah, you're still finding
mixed aspect ratios,
you're finding
black and white and color. And
well, like some of those early PTA films, it's like he's like, look at how technically amazing I am.
Yeah.
And some of the later ones, he's just like serving the story. And it's like, he has all the ability to do whatever, but he's serving the story. And I kind of feel like it's that. But anyways, that's sidetrack. But the Video Village thing stood out to me because it's kind of like if we're having this conversation and then I pick up my phone and start texting somebody.
Yep.
It's like, and I could do that and still be listening.
Right.
But I mean,
and
I owe you the respect of being, making eye contact. We're listening to each other. Like if I was just sitting here and letting you talk, and then it's like, okay, my turn to talk.
Yeah.
And then, when I finish saying what I want to say, you talk. That's not a conversation.
Yep.
And I think when you're making a great piece of work, whether it's film, music, whatever, it has to be a dialogue. And going off to Video Village or standing is almost akin to opening your phone and being like, yeah, I'm listening to you.
And he was talking too, in addition to that, he was talking about some actors really struggle with seeing or hearing themselves in playback.
Yeah.
So let's say one actor like really likes playback and wants to go over there with the director, or because Bradley was directing himself, he needs to watch playback. And then the other actors in the scene, he was in, obviously working with Carey Mulligan. And I'm not saying that doesn't like seeing herself or hearing herself back, but that can create a fracture of the safeness you feel, because it does something, whatever the effect it has on that performer. And and if you're just like we got to watch playback, and it's not something that they feel safe doing, but you're just steamrolling them, that's going to have obviously a real effect on the work.
Absolutely.
Now, I would say, though, not to spend a bunch of time on Video Village, there are some actors, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I've seen, and you might not know this, but I've seen some BTS stuff with DiCaprio that he really likes watching playback. Like it's a really helpful tool to him, because like with me, people are like, how do you watch yourself back on your videos? I'm like, I don't give a shit. I can watch myself back. If I was performing a scene, if I was at the premiere, like I have no problem watching myself. And it's not like, oh, look how great I am. I love looking at myself on the screen or whatever. I think for me, I'm just so focused, and not that the other people aren't, somebody who doesn't like playback. I'm just so focused on like getting the work done that anything that I don't like about hearing my voice or seeing myself goes away. It's just, I don't
that's what I was going to say.
I mean, sometimes I'm like, you got some bags under your eyes, buddy. You're not looking so great. But I'm like, that's
water,
me.
Yeah. No, I think with the DiCaprio thing, maybe, I mean, I would imagine with DiCaprio, just being a fan of some of those performances, he probably gets lost in the performance quite a bit.
Yeah.
And so I bet the experience of playback to him often it's him seeing it for the first time. Like he's like, oh, I know I did that. Yeah. Okay. The tone's not quite okay. I need to try this. Mm-hmm. Okay. It's not, it's not, let's go see how I did. It's more. It's not. Yeah. That's a lot of time when he's watching the playback. It's probably the first time he's actually been able to kind of he's intellectualizing the performance for the first time.
Yep.
And that's where a lot of good performance comes from. And I mean, I'm sure the same thing, but it's just like I'm sure Cooper still does dailies, so that's a similar and I don't know. It's up to the choice of who's doing it, because I could see the benefit of having playback, but then if the director's vigilant enough, maybe then he's like, okay, we need to try this,
yeah,
or she.
Right.
Just talked about Greta Gerwig before, but no, I think it's interesting how he was like, I don't want people sitting down. I want people engaged. I don't want people looking at screens. I don't want cell phones on the set.
And obviously that doesn't mean that like when it's time for lunch and they're at catering, like people aren't like seated and taking a break. It just means like when we're working, we're up. I think focused.
More sets should do that. I mean, we've just gone down the film set rabbit. I think, but I think it's because like that's the world that we can most easily relate this to. But it goes for musicians in the studio. It goes for writing. It goes for, I mean, just if you're working on something in an office with somebody else, show them the respect. And like, I think the product will be better if anything. This is across the board. Create that safe space where no idea is a bad idea. Nobody is lesser because they, you know, because a lot of times I think those off the wall things are going to surprise and make a better result.
And I'll tell you one director. I've been on a few sets in Chicago, you know, and not like I was an actor, like in a speaking role or anything, but I was a stand-in on a Harold Ramis movie in Chicago. And Harold Ramis could make a very safe set. Like, he, you know, he had Video Village, you know, he was working with John Cusack. It was a movie called The Ice Harvest, link in the show notes. And the way he was back and forth between Video Village and working with John, and then in between setups when there was more complex, you know, production design changes, he would like bring out his acoustic guitar for the, like in the extras and the stand-ins, and it was just a wonderful place to be on that set. And you just he had actually I was standing in for the actor opposite John Cusack, and I didn't know protocol because I'm like I never had been a stand-in before. I'd done extra work. And so your sort of designation as a stand-in is you're called second team. And the first AD never told second team to stand down. That's usually what you say when the stand-ins are done in first team, the actors come in. Well, they never said that. So I'm like standing in the hallway on my mark. And then like John Cusack and Harold Ramis walk up and they're like talking about the scene literally right next to me. I'm like looking at him like, oh, okay, that's cool. That's interesting. I went to acting school, so I'm I'm like watching the BTS in person. And then like John Cusack notices and he's like, he's like, hey, how's it going? And I'm like, great. And he's like, and Harold just gives me this look, and he's like, "You can stand down."
But then I went. He didn't do it in a way.
Super like, awesome.
He's not like he's like stand down, fucking idiot. Like he's.
And then I went over, and I was like watching with some distance, respectful distance, but I was watching at Video Village, and he clocked it a couple times, and he just let me. He was like, this guy's interested in the whole process and all that.
That's
the
awesome.
second AD was super nice. Like, so it was just
you know.
But then I'm like, but then I'm like, you being so ignorant of set protocol and not understanding like how to like not be like the weird guy that's doing weird out of the ordinary stuff, you know, like you might have put a couple people off. Like,
who knows though? He might have, he might have been like, oh man, that's, you know, I like that. That's keeps it interesting for him. I think, you know, we've all been on the sets where everybody's more focused on, you know, they're just chasing something. They're trying to show that they're better than everybody else in some way or another. And we've all been on I think, you know, the opposite. The Harold Ramis said, or like one of the biggest compliments I ever got from a model was like, that felt like therapy.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, like that is the best compliment you could ever get.
Yeah. I mean, that's, you know, arguably one of the safest places you can be, right?
Right. Like that, like that's an unbelievable thing to like, if you can make, like you want it to feel like that.
Right.
And you know, that goes for the crew, that goes for the talent. Like nobody enjoys. It's kind of, I heard this thing the other day about if there's certain people that there's an expectation that the conversation is going to be like an intellectual conversation.
Right.
And there's only so much of that that you can take.
Yep.
Like the best I think is where you can just weave in and out of, like we can talk about some nonsense for an hour and we can talk about something that's meaningful to us for an hour. And we can weave those in and out. But there's certain conversations where you're like, this is going to, like, I'm going to have to really like pay attention in a way that's like, recall and da. And maybe that's just maybe that's just how I look at some of these things, but it's like, that's exhausting.
It can be, yeah.
A lot of times you just want to be able to just
flow.
Exist. Yeah.
Well, and I think that's what we're getting at with the safe space. You know, we talked about like, what was that thing and what was at the root of it? Ego. Well, to me, like, well, like, okay, great, safe space, but why? Why are we making that? What's the desired outcome of that? And to me, and I had this note on my note as something, a possible topic for us to talk about, now that we have to dedicate a big segment to this because we probably don't have time to, because it's 4:03.
Yeah, you're gonna have to get going pretty soon.
But just to wrap up the point, it's, you want everybody to be feeling safe and the ability to be vulnerable and trust their collaborators and the crew and whatever situation you're in, so that you can get to a state where you're channeling.
Yeah.
You're not, you're writing your diary entry, you're telling the truth, you're in the moment, you're listening, you've surrendered, all those things fall away. Because, you know, from my background as an actor, my background writing, and now doing photography and making YouTube videos, the times I love it the most, whether it's with other people or on my own, is when you get to that channeling state. When you are channeling, as Rick Rubin calls it, the source, as Stephen Pressfield calls it, the muse. Yeah. You're not, I mean, sometimes to the point where you get done doing the thing and you don't remember what happened. You were in I don't know, a different plane of existence. I don't know, whatever you want to call it, but you were channeling something and making work. And I think when someone like Bradley Cooper recognizes that, he is going to do everything he can to create an atmosphere. I always love when Quentin Tarantino would talk on his sets there. He would like sort of remind everyone, hey, everyone, just a reminder, we're making a movie. Yeah. Isn't this amazing? Like just that, to sort of take that edge off of like, you know, we worked overtime, or we're on, you know, Fraturdays, and, you know, or whatever the thing is. Like, hey, just a little gentle reminder, we're making a movie. Yeah. Like, this is what we're doing.
Don't lose yourself in
just like, we're making a movie. Yeah. This is awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, you know, just clean intentions make all the difference in the world. Yeah. And
managing expectations, creating a safe space, understanding what the desired outcome is of everybody giving their all to get to that state of truth and purity and channeling and all of that to make great work. And that was another note I had. Alex Soth, I was watching, again, this is coming up in my Instagram feed, Alex Soth, the photographer, and he like did a little like, hey, my master class that he had partnered with Magnum Photos on was whatever. And they showed a little clip on his computer, and it was something like, my mom asked me what I wanted to do when I grew up. And, you know, I just said, I want to make something great. Yeah. You know, and, you know, that goes to Quentin Tarantino's point. That goes to Bradley Cooper creating a safe space. Like, everybody like wants to make, these people want to make something great.
Yeah. Spike Lee,
Spike of course. Yeah. Spike Jones, all the Harold Ramis.
Yeah. Norman Jewison.
Yeah. Especially Harold Ramis. We were overnights, you know, and there's a lot of people. There was a restaurant scene. You've got a ton of extras. Like, it's a lot to be working overnights. It was the first night of overnights too. Oof, that's tough.
Yeah. Everybody's in
everybody had to
when you get to a set like that too, particularly one thing that I think is true, especially in the extra pool, is it's often a group of people that are trying to prove themselves. Yeah. Or maybe they're an extra on a big movie. They've made it to the top tier of the worst rung of the ladder.
And they're gonna overact. They're gonna
overact. They wanna show everybody that oh, you know, I'll probably be in the scene next time. What, and that's like the worst environment. Like, you got to almost get in there and handle that.
You're not auditioning,
because it is like a toxic that'll permeate through the entire set. Yeah. And I mean, you can just by simply being like, hey, look, we're here to create a piece of art. Yeah. Like, we're all here, we're playing essentially. We're all getting paid to play. Yeah. Like, there's people, you know, working in mines, and there's people like who have physical labor every day. We're all here just, you know, dicking around essentially.
Yeah, the dream.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, you know, you settle that ego down a little bit, and it opens up a grand possibility for anything.
Yeah, 100%, man.
But cool. Well, we got to let you go. Your alarm went off.
I got to go pick up that kid.
It had been a golden afternoon, and I remember having the familiar conviction that life was beginning over again with the summer.